So in this session of our 15-minute fundamentals, what I'm going to do is take a look at the basics of reporting in SAP Business One. So we're going to quickly log in. Now, important to remember that there are two versions of SAP Business One. You have SAP Business One that is running on Microsoft SQL Server, and then you have SAP Business One version for HANA. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on SAP Business One running on SQL Server in the first instance, because the functionality that I'm going to take you through right now exists in both versions of the software. All right, it's only when you move to SAP Business One version for HANA that you get some more advanced analytics capabilities. So again, we're going to focus specifically on the built-in functionality and the built-in reporting inside SAP Business One. So you've got all of your data inside SAP Business One. You've been entering transactions, you've been working away, and now you want to get that data out. Well, there's a couple of different ways that you can do that. So obviously the first way is to use the built-in reporting capabilities of SAP Business One. So what you're going to notice when you go across here into your modules and you open up the modules in SAP Business One, when you go into each of these functional areas, let's say financials, when you go into financials, what you'll see is you have your financial reports. Now, notice that the little icon for this, that's indicating it's a folder. So when you open it up, there's a number of folders underneath that. So you've got your accounting reports, and so you've got your standard reports that you would expect to have: transaction journal entries, transaction reports by project, your document journals. This is also where you can go and run your 1099s and your 1096 reports for your regular reporting on transactions that you're doing with your vendors. And of course, you've also got your tax reports. Now, a couple of other things to be aware of is that you've got those reports capabilities sitting underneath each of the modules. So for example, if I go into CRM and I go in and I look in my CRM reports, and you can see all of those reports there, all of your activities, your inactive customers, a very popular report when you want to look at the customers who haven't been transacting with you for a while, you want to do some follow-up. You've got all of those reports there. But when you are inside the menu system, if you go right down the bottom, you'll actually see under reports all of those same reports that are set up underneath each one of these modules are all put under here to make life easy for you. So if you are looking for reports, you can just go straight here into the reports section and you can run your reports from here. All right. Now, SAP Business One takes a very specific view of reporting. All right. And what it does is it presents you with the information on the screen first before it goes ahead and asks you, do you want to generate that into a report? Why is this? And I kind of like this approach. It's because fundamentally, most people, when they are generating reports, they don't want a report because they want a printout. They want the report because they want to see the data that's contained in that report, and they want to use that data to make decisions. So let's take an example. If I am looking at, let's say, the inactive customers report, one of the things that you'll notice with most of the reports that you run, when you first open the report, it starts off with a selection criteria. And this is basically asking you, when you're looking at your data, how much of it or how little of it do you want to select? And, what are the parameters of that data? Do you want data that matches, certain scenarios? So in this particular instance, in SAP Business One, we have the ability to group our customers. So it's asking me, hey, well, based on these customer groups, do you want to see a specific customer group, or do you want to see all of them? So in this case, I'm saying I want to see all. Now, there's also this option here that you'll find on some of the report screens where you can just say select all. And what that does, that will select the criteria, or it will preset the criteria so that you are seeing everything that's in the system. So you then click on OK. And now what you'll see is basically the information that SAP Business One has drawn out for you, the basis of which will be turned into a report. So if you were to go up here now and either click up here in the toolbar, the report preview, or the report print, or for that matter, you can actually choose to push that report out to an email. But let's go do a report preview. What you'll see is just that standard information pushed out into a very simple report. Now, this is an example of a report that is built using what's called the Print Layout Designer. You might hear people refer to this as PLD. All right, that's the very basic standard reporting tool that comes with SAP Business One, built into the application. The design tools are built into the application. Now you also have the capability, because it's bundled with SAP Business One, you have the capability to use Crystal Reports. And what Crystal Reports does is it gives you a lot more flexibility and a lot more capability when you're structuring your reports. And to be honest, a lot more people are familiar with Crystal Reports. So bear that in mind. This is a very standard looking plain report. All it does is basically takes this data and generates it into a report format. But of course, going back to my original point, you want the data that's in there. Okay, and that's one of the reasons why when you're looking at this information, it gives you these golden arrows. So you can see as you hover over each one of these customers, it's actually showing you some information. We're going to talk about how you control what information you see when you hover. Okay, it's called tooltips. When you're hovering over the screens, you've got the capability to adjust that. But of course, you've got the ability to, with one click, you can then drill down and look at that customer in detail. All right, so think of reports as a jumping off point into other areas of functionality into SAP Business One, particularly when you're looking at the sub-modules like, like your business partners, like your CRM, like your sales and purchasing, right? These are ways of getting access to that information so that you can make decisions. Now, of course, you do have your standard audit style reports, which are transaction listings, and there's plenty of those. All right, but just bear this in mind. When Business One generates a report, it shows you the information first. And of course, you can see here, I've got all this information, but it gives me some additional filters. So I might be interested in saying, okay, I only want to see inactive customers, but let's narrow it down on the basis of those customers who haven't received only sales orders for a little while. So I untick sales quotations, I untick delivery notes, I untick AR invoices, and I untick AR down payments. Now you'll notice nothing has changed. That's because I just have to go here now and click refresh. All right, and so what it's going to do, it's going to review that information and it's going to refresh that information based on the change. Now you see, because I've done that refresh, what I can do now, I've done the refresh, nothing's changed. You'll see the button disappears. As soon as I make a change up here, I untick orders. Now the refresh button has come back in. I click refresh, and of course now I'm not selecting anything, so there's no data in here at all. I can go and switch on my AR invoices again, and I can click refresh, bang, up comes the data. Make sense? Now, a couple of other things to bear in mind. Again, in one of my earlier sessions, I talked about this little blue button with the arrow. What that does, that takes you back to your selection criteria. So you can then come back in here and you can say, all right, I only want to look at my customers that are in the high-tech sector. And then you say, okay, and now you're getting that narrowed down version of that information, just looking at your customers in the high-tech sector. Let's take a look at another example of a report, just so you can see that consistency between these screens. So if I go into my sales and purchasing, for example, and I want to get a list of all of my back orders, a very popular report. So you can see we've still got our selection criteria, but of course it's giving me a lot more information now that I can base my selection criteria on. So my starting date and my ending date based on the delivery date or the customer code. Then I can narrow it down by items. So I can narrow it down if I've got multiple warehouses, I can narrow it down and just select a particular warehouse. Okay, and of course, you've got the ability here to drill down and look at that underlying information. So you can, if you're not sure, is this really the information I want? You can go in and take a look at that in more detail and say, yep, okay, the New York General Warehouse, let's have a look at that. You can drill down into that warehouse and say, yep, this is definitely the warehouse I want. Here's the address of the warehouse. Yep, that's all fine. And of course, you can click on here and you can show the location in the web browser to be really, really sure that that's definitely the right one that you wanted. So that capability to narrow the information down is there. Now, bear in mind, there are literally hundreds of standard reports inside SAP Business One. But if you were to take all these different combinations, you can end up with thousands of permutations or variations on those reports. So, important point to remember. Now, that's your reporting. Next thing that people often look at is they say, okay, well, what about when I want to print my invoices? So when you're looking at SAP Business One, we've got reports, and then we've got your what we like to call marketing documents. So these are things like your order confirmations, your picking slips, your invoices, your purchase orders. So they're called marketing documents because fundamentally they are documents which go externally to the organization. Now, a lot of these marketing documents, you'll also see them referred to as forms. So, for example, when you are inside sales order entry, you can get to that information. So now, again, remember, we've got our common functions. So you can use this common functions widget. If there's a report you run all the time, remember to put that report into your common functions. Let's say I'm the warehouse manager. In sales and purchasing, I've got my back order report. I run this report very, very often. So I can just click and drag it up here into my common functions. And you can see it's a report because the icon changes. All right, so always remember that. Any of your menu options, you can put them here into your common functions. All right, so anyway, back to where I was headed. In our common functions, I've got my sales order screen. So now, if I'm opening up my sales order screen and I've set it so that it comes up and takes up all of the space on my canvas, one of the things that you will see, if I call up an existing sales order, I'll go to the last data record using my navigation buttons here. So what you'll see when you're looking at the sales order screen is you'll see, of course, you've got the ability to generate a preview, and you've got the ability to generate the printed output of the report. And again, of course, you can email it out. But what you're going to see when you look up the top, remember this toolbar is context sensitive. It's going to bring up this extra option, and this is the layout designer. So when you click on the layout designer, what you'll see is it will show you all the different layouts that you've got that you can use with this particular document. So right now, I've got a layout that's built on Crystal Reports. How do I know that? You'll see the type is Layout CR. That means it's based on Crystal Reports. These ones are Layout PLD. That means they're based on the Print Layout Designer. Now you'll notice that this one is in bold. That means that somebody has gone in and set this as the default. Now remember, I'm logged in as a system administrator, so I can do anything I want. So I might, for example, go in here and say, I want to use this report, and I want to set this as the default. Now this is another really nice piece of functionality when you're doing your marketing documents. What you can do, even though I've said it's the default, I've got some additional options. I can say set it as the default for every user, just set it as my default as the current user, or I can go in here and say set this as the default for very specific users. For example, I might have certain users, certain sales order entry people who look after a particular customer, and I've done a customer specific print layout or order confirmation layout for them. So I can map it down to that level. So you can end up with, like, you can if you've got 1,000 customers, you could end up with 1,000 different print layouts, God forbid, because every single customer has a different print layout. That's the flexibility that's provided for you. And then you can go in here, and that's where what I'm talking about here. You can say set this as the default for all business partners, or you can say set it as the default for a specified business partner. And remember, wherever you see this 3 dots or an ellipsis, you can click on that and you're able to select the business partners. So now, why is it only listing 1? Remember, I got to this from a sales order already. So by default, it's just showing me this one business partner. So I can say this is going to be the default for Earthshaker, but I can click on add, and then what will allow me to do is it will allow me to select other business partners. So I could say, you know what, I actually want this report layout to be used all the time where I'm doing orders for construction customers. So I'll say OK there, and so now it's added all of my construction customers, and I've only got one, which is Maxitech. But there you go, you can now see I can select it for those two customers and say update. So now when I click on OK, what's going to happen, and I click update, so you just make sure you go back through the process and you'll get your little operation completed successfully message here. What will now happen when I go and generate that report? A simple one click. It's now giving me the report using that particular format. All right, so this is my standard sales order layout. Quite functional, but again, not as nice and not as graphical as what you can achieve with Crystal reports. Next thing to bear in mind, let's say you've got this report layout, and we're going to get a little bit more detailed here now, so bear with me. Let's say I've got this report layout and I'm thinking, that looks all right, but you know what? I actually want this field to be called item description. I don't want it to be called description. So how do I change that? Well, if you close that down, what you'll see when you go in here, you can click on your layout designer. All right, so you've got this little pencil here. If you click on that, brings up that screen again that we were in there before, where we were setting this as our default. But you can click here on the button that says Manage Layout. And what that will then do is that will bring up your report and layout manager. Now, don't get confused, this is quite a busy looking screen. It's just as presenting with a lot of information. So, you know, oftentimes you just need to focus on the task at hand. Don't worry about all these other things. We'll get to those later. But here it is. Here's my sales order. All I do is I go here and I choose edit. So when I click on edit, it's going to go and it's going to open up for me the print layout designer. Now it's just telling me, hey, my pictures folder has not been defined. And that was that little red error message. That's just saying when I want to put pictures into my reports, it doesn't know where to find them, and that's in your general settings, but don't worry too much about that. So here is my field. So you'll see all I have to do is click on the field, and as I click on each one of these fields, and this is very basic what I'm showing you here, we're not going to get into the deep details of this, but when you click on the field, across here it shows you that field information, and then here are all the properties of that field. So here is my content. It's free text. There is the field information, so I can just go in here and type item. All right, so that's now changing that to item description. So I can now go here into my print layout designer, and I can go in here and I can say save as, and now it's giving me the ability to create an additional version of that report. So I can go in here, I can call this my modified sales order. All right, and then I'll say OK. And that's now been saved. So again, I just simply click on the close button up in the top right hand corner, brings me back to my report and layout manager. And so what I'll now see is that if I refresh this, I've now got my additional modified sales order. So I can now go in here again as I did before, and I can say, let's say OK to that. So what I can do is I can come in here now, and I've got my standard report layouts, and there is my report layout that I just set. So I can now come in here and I can say, you know what, I'm going to set this as the default. I'm now going to set it as a default for all business partners, and then I'll say I want to set this as a default for all business partners for whom a default layout has not been assigned. But remember, okay, Earthshaker actually has a default report set. So if I go in here, and you'll see that before we set Earthshake and we set them to have this to have a default layout. So I'm going to say set this default for all business partners, and I'll say OK to that. That's now been flagged as my default. I'll hit update, and it's saying, hey, you've chosen to set a default for all users or business partners, but they're already default selections. Do you want to delete them and overwrite them? In this case, I'm going to say yes. So again, just to stop you from making that mistake unwittingly. And so I go OK. And now when I generate my report, you'll now see the new version of the report with item description. Now, if you've made changes and it's not showing up, just go back and make sure that you have selected that report as the default layout. Okay, make sure that there's nothing that's been set inside here that's stopping that report layout from being your default. Okay, so that functionality exists right throughout the entire system. So that's a little bit of an overview of how you start generating reports. In our next session, we're going to take a look at getting in and starting to run some queries.